Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of FreeThought Hour. First of all, I've got a little apology because Tercia can't be with us tonight. I'm co-host less, if that's a word. She's got other important, I think it's a family wedding or something, so there you go. But I do have an excellent guest, and it's in the form of Professor Chris French. How the devil are you, Chris?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you, John?
Yeah, I'm fine too. Great. Good. Well, I know you've got an announcement to make about a book that's coming out. So can we do that first of all? Because I can make you a little promotional banner.
Oh, yeah, let's go for it. Right.
So
well,
it's called...
It's called The Science of Weird Shit. And it's coming out on March the 19th, and it's from MIT Press. So I'm very excited about it. It's the first popular science book that I've ever written. And it's essentially an introduction to anomalistic psychology.
Which is the next question I'm going to ask you about.
I kind of think it might be. Yeah. Anomalistic psychology is essentially the science of weird stuff. So I'm interested in all kinds of weirdness, from people who claim that they've been abducted by aliens.
There's been a lot of those.
Yes. There's been a lot of those. People who think they've seen a ghost. People who claim to have psychic powers. The whole range, really, of anything weird. I'm interested in it. But I'm interested in it from a fairly skeptical point of view. I used to believe in a lot of that stuff myself when I was younger. I did indeed.
That is interesting.
Yeah, and I become more skeptical the more I've learned about the way that our own minds can fool us. The less compelling I've found these kinds of claims. So these days I'm very much a card-carrying skeptic, but I'm still fascinated by these topics.
Yeah. Wasn't it, who was it that said, it was Feynman, Richard Feynman, who said, you've got to check for being fooled because you're most likely to fool yourself.
Yeah, you're the most easy. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I've misquoted it, but the gist is there.
That's it. I mean, I think once you become more aware of the ways in which our own minds can fool us, it doesn't act as a kind of perfect protection against being fooled. We've still all got these biases, and they will affect the way we perceive what's going on around us, the way we interpret evidence, all kinds, a whole range of things. I think it makes you a bit more alert to the fact that you can be fooled. And for me, a very important part of being a skeptic is being open to the possibility that you may be wrong. You may hold certain views now about various topics, but new evidence may come along that makes you change your mind. And I've got great respect for people who actually change their minds when they become aware of evidence that contradicts it, rather than sticking to just hammering out the same lines time and time again.
We don't like dogma, do we?
I certainly don't. I'm not a fan at all.
Do you think that we've evolved to be sort of suspicious and wary, and to imagine that there's sort of bogeys around the next corner all the time?
I think there's a lot of strength in that argument. The kind of idea that, I mean, we've got to remember that the brains that we have are not that different to the brains that Stone Age people had. And in terms of our evolutionary history, then we know that there were great dangers around. It was, to get through a day without being kind of eaten by a predator or attacked by an enemy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my thinking very much follows kind of some of the ideas of people like Daniel Kahneman, this idea of thinking fast and slow. The basic idea is that we've got two distinct modes of thought, sometimes called System 1 and System 2. System 1, if you wanted to summarize it in one word, at the risk of oversimplification, you'd call kind of intuition. It's when you make decisions very quickly. It's effortless. It's unconscious. It's emotional driven, all of those things.
Yes.
In contrast, you have system. I mean, a good example of system one thinking would be if you've just been introduced to someone for the first time, and very quickly you've made a decision about whether you like them or not. You know, you couldn't really at that point say why. It's just a very emotional reaction.
It's not very far from the knee jerk, is it?
Well, exactly. Yeah, and in contrast to that, we've got system two thinking, which is much slower. It's effortful. We're consciously aware of it. It's the kind of thinking that you would employ if I were to give you a mental puzzle to solve.
Yeah, yeah.
Think through it. It's step by step. Whereas system one is based on heuristics, so quick and dirty rules of thumb, which usually give you the right answer. System two thinking is much slower, but might be kind of a bit more reliable. But if you think of the evolutionary history, then we've got a situation where you've got a trade-off between the speed and is it better to rely on a system that is very fast and usually right, or a system that is a little bit more likely to be right but is a lot slower? And everybody always gives the same example. You know, somebody Stone Age man there's something rustling in the bushes. Is it a saber-toothed tiger or not? Well, it's a better survival strategy to just assume in an instant that it is and get the hell out of there rather than hang around to make sure, you know.
Yes. Is it the wind or is it the
Exactly. You're going to end up as lunch, you know. Now, in terms of passing on your genes to the next generation, then we've ended up with a kind of bias towards making the kind of errors. There are two kind of errors you can make. Obviously, one would be you think there's a saber-toothed tiger there when in fact there isn't. Well, the cost of that is just a little bit of wasted energy running away from something that wasn't actually there, or missing a saber-toothed tiger that is there. That's a much more costly mistake. So we've developed mental processing that favors making errors on what scientists would call a type 1 error, kind of thinking something is there when it isn't, as opposed to a type 2 error, missing something that really is there. And that makes a lot of sense to me, you know. And it also I think is the roots for belief in spirits and other.
Well, I wish we had Sophie Scott in this same conversation, because I would be the couple of routes I want to go down now. One is there any connection between this type 1, type 2 business and the subconscious and the conscious mind? I mean, are we talking cerebral hemispheres at the top and cerebellum at the bottom, or what?
I think that kind of you know, the idea of the lizard brain and there's all this kind of stuff, I think that can be overplayed. So I mean, again, it's a nice framework for thinking about it. But I mean, certainly I think the idea that, as I said, type 2 thinking, you are consciously aware of it. You know, it's when you've got that voice in your head that most of us have, not everybody in fact, but where you are aware of what you're thinking about and kind of going from this stage of the problem solving to that stage of the problem solving and so on. Whereas that doesn't apply in terms of type 1, system 1 thinking. Now, the thing is, we, including, you know, all of us rationalists who think that we're kind of so rational, in fact, we are much more influenced by system 1 thinking than we're aware of. You know, what's also the case is that system 2 is very good at rationalizing. So you know, we can put forward plausible reasons why, this is what I believe, but sometimes the real reason is for factors that are outside of our conscious awareness.
Oh, you've opened another can of worms there. First of all, I want to talk about pareidolia. Where does this fit in? Because we tend to find patterns where they're not necessarily present. Is that?
That's a nice example of this very kind of quick processing that we're doing. I mean, pareidolia is one example of a situation where we see meaning and significance when it isn't in fact really there.
That's the visual one, isn't it? There's
it can be auditory as well.
Yeah, I was going to say there's also a very interesting auditory version of it.
My very favorite example of pareidolia, the most powerful example, which I used to I still do to some extent crowbar it into any talk that I do, whether it's relevant or not, because it's just such a good demonstration.
Yes.
It relates to this idea that a lot of Christian fundamentalists put about in America, that there are satanic messages in rock music, or all pop music, in fact, but you can only hear it when you play the record backwards. Now, there are lots of websites you can go to where you can play these clips, and what you'll find typically is that you can't actually make out what the message is supposed to be until you read it. And then once you've got that expectation in your head, then that influences this ambiguous sound. The best example of all is a clip from Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. And I'll typically, during talks, I'll play this. First of all, I'll play it forwards just because I like it, no other reason. But then I'll play it backwards and say to people, did you hear the message? And most people will say, it sounds like backwards gibberish, for the very good reason that it is backwards gibberish. And then I'll show them the message and play the same sound file again. And it sounds subjectively completely different. And you wonder how you missed that message in the first place. Well, the reason is because it isn't there.
Once you've told them what to hear, they will hear it.
And that crops up in lots of other contexts as well. I mean, another one would be paranormal investigators. They're very fond of what they call the electronic voice phenomenon. So they'll go into these reputedly haunted locations with some kind of recording device, and they'll leave it running for hours and hours, ideally with no one else in the room. And then the next day they'll play it back, and they claim that they can pick up spirit voices.
Yes.
You typically find, and again, there are websites you can go to, and I encourage your listeners to try this. I mean, boring old skeptics like me would say, well, there's two things that are going on here. One is that sometimes they are just inadvertently picking up on real human voices, people that happen to be around, I remember once doing some daytime TV, and the paranormal investigator was playing, very proudly playing his EVP. And there's no doubt at all, it was someone singing Celine Dion songs, and it was pretty terrifying. It's just that I think it's a human being rather than a ghost, But the other aspect is that sometimes these are just random kind of background noises that are a bit speech-like. People are imposing meaning on them. And again, you can do the same kind of demonstration where you play these clips to the audience and get them to guess what the message is. And they typically have no idea. And then you'll say, well, it's supposed to say this. And then you play it again.
And they hear it. So I guess you wouldn't want me to promote you as a ghost busting service. You don't really want your name to be up there under who you're going to call.
I do get introduced that way quite a lot, and I can cope with it. The very first radio program I ever did back in the day when I was still doing my PhD, or had I finished? But anyway, it was in Leicester. It was Radio Leicester, and of course, the music they used to introduce it was the Ghostbusters theme. So I can live with that. But yeah, I mean, again, I don't think of myself as a parapsychologist or a paranormal investigator. I am a psychologist who has an interest in these kinds of claims. Anomalistic psychology, exactly.
Yes. Well, I could tell you about many years ago when I had a friend at college. I was doing my first degree, and he had a similar interest to you. And he was doing one of these guess the card experiments where you're supposed to telepathically predict when you turn it over, what it's going to be. And I was very skeptical about that. But I did join in on one of his jaunts, which was to Loch, where there's supposed to be a monster. Obviously, it's not Nessie. This is the next door Loch. And this one is Morag.
I've heard of Morag. I have heard of Morag, yes.
So we went up there and camped on the side of the loch for a couple of nights and watched the water surface. And we had huge telephoto lenses, and there was a boat with side scans, sonar, which had only just become available. We didn't see anything, but we had a good time, and there was beer.
Yeah. Well, I've recently been doing a thing. There's a program on Radio 4 called Uncanny, which
Yes, it
is
is.
and I've been one of the kind of guest skeptics on that program, and they also did a theatre tour, which I took part in, and part of it was up in Scotland. I decided it'd be a good idea to take my wife and my dog with me because I didn't want to be on my own during the day. You know, we'd have things to do. So our dog has become famous as Ted. He's a Labrador, Ted the Skepti dog. And we went to Loch Ness. We have pictures of him doing his investigation of Loch Ness. We were there for a full 20 minutes, and Ted was convinced there is no monster there. So we can knock that one out of the way now.
Well, the police use them. They're sniffer dogs, aren't they? So if any ghost has a smell, the perfect
Ted would be the dog for that.
Yes. So how did you get to be? I know at the moment you've got a grand title. You're a
emeritus professor. Yeah, that just means I've retired.
Yes. Visiting a bit. Yes. Emeritus professor of anomalous.
Yeah, no, I wish I had gone for. You can kind of choose your own title, and I could, if I'd have thought about it, I could have been. Whether I'd probably be the only one in the world, I could have been a professor of anomalistic psychology, but I'm not. I'm just a professor of psychology. I'm now an emeritus professor of psychology. So it's a bit of a missed opportunity there, but there you go.
Ah, shame. Yeah. So how did you get to be the person you are today? Tell us a story.
Well, I used to believe in a lot of this stuff. People are often quite surprised to hear that. To the extent that I can even remember as a postgraduate student. So this was kind of well into my early adulthood, doing my PhD on a completely different topic. And someone recommended a particular book that they thought I might like. It was called Parapsychology, Science or Magic. And it was by James Alcock, a Canadian social psychologist. And they were right. I really did. I loved the book. And it was the first skeptical treatment of all this stuff that I'd ever come across.
Yeah.
And it really kind of opened my eyes. There were lots of references in the back to some publication called The Skeptical Inquirer, which at the time I'd never even heard of. I kind of took out a subscription to that. There were also lots of references to this guy called James Randi, whom at the time I had never heard of, and various other people.
But at that time, he was the amazing Randi.
He was indeed, yeah. And I mean, he really did have an amazing life. I mean, I got to know him very well. I got to the point where I considered him a friend, as also Jim Alcock, which is kind of quite nice. And you've got this person who's written this book that's had this huge influence on the rest of your life. But even then, for the first few years after that, sorry.
And now he's become a friend. Yes.
Right.
So
yeah.
Can I just investigate James Randi a bit because he had this challenge, didn't he? That
yes, yeah.
And I think we'd like to talk about that. Hear what your impression of that is.
Well, this was the $1 million challenge. I mean, it started off as just Randi putting up $10,000 of his own money to anyone who could demonstrate psychic powers or any kind of paranormal phenomenon under controlled conditions. And then eventually, as Randi's reputation grew, more and more people kind of joined and chipped in, and it grew to $1 million. So for a very long time, there was $1 million on offer for anybody who could demonstrate, as I say, paranormal phenomenon under controlled conditions. Now, the way that the challenge worked was that, not unreasonably, Randi would get people to, first of all, pass a preliminary test carried out by people that he knew and trusted. And so we ended up running quite a number of those tests. I've never actually counted up how many we did, but a fair few. And they could be things like we did tests of dowsers, we did tests of psychics, mediums, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, the thing here is that these claimants never actually passed the preliminary test. So they never ended up actually going for the formal $1 million test that had they passed it, that have got the $1 million. But again, I don't think it's reasonable for Randi to admit. And sometimes he waived the preliminary test.
But I imagine it's if you're looking to make an impact, you need a show, and so you need some people who have been selected.
Yeah, well, I mean, Randi was definitely a showman. You know, I mean, he was a great showman. He was a very, very well respected conjurer. I mean, a lot of his enemies, kind of say, oh, he was a third-rate conjurer. Well, no, he wasn't at all. He was respected around the world by the likes of Penn and Teller. I mean, he was, huge influence on Penn and Teller. He great friends with Richard Wiseman and all the, the world's conjuring community held him in very, very high esteem. Now, I'm not in favor of anybody being put on a pedestal, and that includes Randi. Much as I loved him, and I really did. I think he was he was not perfect. He could be a crotchety old bugger, no doubt at all. If he liked you, then he was great towards you. And, fortunately, I got on really well with him.
Yeah, but you're right. We shouldn't elevate anybody to the position of authority.
Exactly.
We should be able to challenge anybody and get them to justify their propositions, whatever they are.
We all do it. I mean, again, it's inevitable that we will. Again, it's part of human nature, isn't it? But again, I think we need to be careful about that. There's probably no other person on the planet who sees the world exactly the way you do or I do. There's going to be areas of disagreement, and that's fine. That's all part of being human.
Yeah. And we're social animals, so we gather together in tribes, and that needs a leader. And there you go. Yeah. So was there a documentary about James Randi, or is there ever going to be a movie? What sort of stage are we at?
No, there's a very good documentary. I don't know whether it's sorry, excuse me. It's called An Honest Liar. It's one of the best documentaries I've seen, actually, because I thought of myself at the time when I watched it that I knew pretty much everything there was to know about Randi, but there are always some things in his life which were a surprise. If you get the chance to see it, it has been certainly available on streaming services. I don't know that it currently is. It's called An Honest Liar. It's a really, really excellent documentary. And as I say, a few surprises still in there, even for people who think they know all about Randi.
Because he came out as gay fairly late in his life, didn't he?
Yeah, we all knew, of course, but it was, he came from a generation where there were other things going on in his life as well, which I won't spoil it for your viewers.
No.
Watch it, you'll get the same kind of what, really, moment that I enjoy.
No spoilers. But he did a good job with Peter Popoff, didn't he?
Oh God, yeah. Well, on the one hand, yes. For anybody out there who doesn't know the story of Popoff was a fundamentalist, I almost said creature, which may be inappropriate, preacher and healer. He used to kind of fill huge arenas with all of these people who believed that they were going to be healed. And one of his tricks was to give the impression that he had a direct line to God. So he would kind of say to somebody in the audience, we've never met before, have we, sir? And he'd go through this routine. Your doctor's name is Dr. Robertson, and his address is blah 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 blah. And he gave this very, very detailed information, and the person's there kind of nodding, and it's really, really impressive. And then he'd kind of, Dr. Jesus is going to heal you. Throw away those pills, all that crap, and. Randi spotted that he had a hearing aid, which he goes, a little bit odd, heal thyself, doctor, so he figured out that's where the information was coming in.
And the audience had filled in questionnaires on their way in.
Exactly, because what they'll do is they'll go to the people as they're queuing up outside and saying, if we don't get the chance to heal you tonight, just put the details down and we'll pray for you later. So all the details are there, and then Popoff's wife was transmitting the information to him via a radio receiver. Anyway, this was revealed on primetime TV in America. 3 different time zones. It was being revealed. So when it first came out in the first one, then all of Popoff's followers were phoning him, and he knew it was going to be. Initially, Popoff denied it, and then eventually he did fess up, and went bankrupt. And you think, "Hooray, fantastic!" But as Randi liked to call these people, they are unsinkable rubber ducks. And now Popoff is back again. He's making more money than he was even back then, and he's just fleecing people. I mean, and it's just basically Popoff, and you can quote me on this, is the scum of the earth.
Yes.
These are who are deliberate con artists. I make a huge distinction between those and your average workaday psychic or medium who probably genuinely believes in what they're doing. And
yes, they think they have powers. Yes.
Whereas these people, they know that they are con artists. They are ripping off the sick, the uneducated, the poor, and they don't give a damn.
The most vulnerable. Yeah. So we're into
the name of Christianity. I mean, it's
horrible. Yeah, we're into TB Joshua territory now, aren't we?
Yeah.
Anyway, Susan Gerber, I think it is, because I've had her on my show too. And she is a modern day perpetrator, protagonist. She's another exposer of these sorts of fakeries, isn't she?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, she does a good job. I mean, I think that again, there's a kind of well, in fact, I'm sure that if you looked at the skeptical community, I would probably be seen as being more of a moderate on that kind of continuum. I mean, I'm more inclined to give people the benefit of the doubt until I have some evidence. Once I know that they're frauds, and a lot of them that are proven frauds. I mean, we'll just pop up, but there was Derek Acora, Colin Fry. There's so many of them that were caught red-handed faking stuff. But then, as I said, I think the vast majority of these people probably are people who genuinely believe they have a gift and they're trying to help people. But I mean, again, people like Susan do a great job in terms of rooting out the deliberate con artists. I mean, in my book, I kind of, with tongue firmly in cheek, I come up with, I think I call it French's second law, that the higher the profile of the medium or psychic, the more likely they are to be a deliberate fraud. Because basically there's huge pressure on them, to deliver on stage every night or to deliver in front of the cameras. Now, your average workaday psychic or medium is far less impressive in their readings because they are relying on kind of intuition and maybe an unconscious version of cold reading or something like this.
Yes.
You have to rely on hot reading if you're doing it every night after night.
Yes. There was I saw it recently on the internet, a list of questions that you could ask people, and they were so vague that a lot of people would identify them as representing them.
Yeah. There's the whole art of cold reading. There are lots of different aspects to it. I used to joke with my students on my anomalistic psychology course that when I would teach them about cold reading, and I'd say that so that when they graduated and they couldn't get a job, they've got something to fall back on, So the next generation of fake psychics will all have been students who were at Goldsmiths doing psychology,
Come to my evening course on palmistry.
I'll show you how to be a fake, But there are lots of different aspects to it. One important aspect is something called the Barnum effect, which there are certain kinds of statements that sound as if they're saying something very perceptive about your innermost personality, but actually apply to everybody. So if you were doing a reading that was just based on Barnum statements, it might be along the lines of, I'm sensing that you've got a lot of unused potential. There's a lot you've achieved in life, but there's so much more you could achieve. Just tap in.
I have. Yes, that's me.
And you've got a better than average sense of humor. I mean, if other people don't laugh at what you laugh at, well, they're the ones with the problem, aren't they? You right sense, and you can go on like that for. a long time. You can use those to pad out a reading. And again, it doesn't all have to be about personality. There's a line that Richard Wiseman mentioned to me years back, which stuck in my head, which is, I'm getting something about an unfinished book. Now, if the person you're doing the reading for happens to be writing a book, and these days with self-publishing on Amazon, quite a lot of people are, wow, how would you possibly know that? But if they're not, they just think it's a book that they're reading or a book that they gave up on. But it's a guaranteed hit, either a small one or a big one, you know. And there's so many lines like that. And you can watch a skilled cold reader in action. These are the deliberate con artists, the people who are not making any claims to having psychic powers. And their readings can be so impressive. And in fact, if you compare them to the people who are sincere in thinking they have some kind of gift, their readings are usually less impressive, in my personal opinion, because they're not cashing in on all of the
they haven't polished their act.
It's a bit more hit and miss, you know. So yes, some people will go away and say, wow, that was amazing. But a lot of people go away and say, well, that was a load of rubbish, you know. But
So I take it that you've never found anybody who is a genuine possessor of psychic powers, telekinesis, or anything?
Not to date. But again, you know, I'm open to the possibility. You know, as I say, we've tested a number of psychics and mediums, done a couple of studies with people who claim that they can their dreams foretell the future. In fact, in the middle of doing an interesting study at the moment with a lucid dreamer. We're interested in the possibility that maybe lucid dreams might provide precognitive information. So even though, as I say, I'm a skeptic, I'm still willing to kind of put these things to the test. It's not the main emphasis of the research that I've done over the years. Most of what we've done has been about trying to come up with non-paranormal explanations, and then, if we can, put those to the test. So we'll look at things like the unreliability of eyewitness testimony. How suggestible are people, you know, and so on. And again, studying those things under controlled conditions and being able to demonstrate that they do have a big effect, you know, that these are important things. It's, you know, it adds power to the skeptical argument.
So now you're making me think of the famous passing the basketball bit around while the unseen gorilla walks by.
Well, yeah, we did a study. My wife, that's a very famous study. The title of which had a fantastic title. "Gorillas in Our Midst" was the title of that paper. Brilliant. And essentially, it was a situation where you got people to watch a video clip of two groups of people kind of intermixed with each other, one wearing black t-shirts, one wearing white t-shirts, and within each group they're throwing a ball to each other, and the instructions are just count the number of times that the people in the white shirts throw the ball to each other, ignore the people in the black shirts. And it lasts about 30 seconds, and you can ask your audience, you know, how many times was it, and they'll give you the number, and you say, well, and did you notice anything odd? And some of them will say, yeah, there's somebody walked on in a gorilla suit and stood there beating their chest and walked off. And other people go, what gorilla? What gorilla? You know, it's kind of, now you think intuitively that this is something that would be bound to grab your attention. It's so weird. And yet, in the original study, about half of the people watching that video didn't see the gorilla. Now, it's called inattentional blindness, and it's a really important phenomenon because a lot of
that down. Inattentional.
There's a good book coming out in March, John, that will tell you all about it.
Well, I wonder whether you know a chap called Josh Davis, who is at Greenwich University, and he's done work with the police on the identity parade.
Yeah. Now we've got very close links. So Josh was at Goldsmiths.
Oh, was he?
I know Josh. And also at Goldsmiths we've got the forensic psychology unit. And I kind of interacted with those people quite a lot because, again, there's a lot of overlap. I mean, my wife was a professor of psychology at Birkbeck, and she did a lot of research on inattentional blindness. She wasn't really interested in general in collaborating with me on the weird stuff, but she contacted me one day to say, do you have a scale that we could use to measure this personality dimension called absorption?
Oh.
And if you score highly on a measure of absorption, then you are the kind of person who, if you are reading a novel or watching a movie, watching a film, you completely cut off the outside world. You know,
Yes. Yeah, I was like that as a boy. If you gave me a book, I would be in the book and you could talk to me. I wouldn't hear you.
Well, that's exactly it. And we kind of figured that you'd expect people, we thought intuitively, who scored highly on this measure to be more likely to be inattentionally blind. Now, I knew from my wider reading that absorption correlates with paranormal belief and paranormal experiences. So we did collaborate on this one. We thought, let's look at all of that in a single study, or a pair of studies, it turned out. So we didn't use the gorilla video. We used a conceptually similar task where you have black and white letters bouncing around a computer screen, and you have to count the number of times the white letters hit the edge of the screen, ignore the black letters, and halfway through, a red cross moves slowly across the background. And you can't miss it if you're not doing the counting task. But if you are doing the counting task, we set it up so that about half the people would miss it. And as we predicted, those people scored higher on absorption and they scored higher on paranormal belief and experience. So it's another demonstration of the kind of unreliability of eyewitness testimony.
Yeah.
And
there are these, although there are, yes, eyewitness is a very dubious tool, but there's also these super recognizers, isn't there?
Which Josh Davis has been studying. Yeah. No, this is, I mean, again, you know, the human mind is just so amazing. The kind of both ends, you know, the kind of some amazing abilities out there.
We've only just realized that, haven't we? Because all this time we've recognized that there are tall people and short people and wide people and thin people, but we haven't realized that there's a lot of differences in here too. We just had the village idiot, but we thought everybody else was more or less the same. It's not true.
Again, I think just a more general point there is that, you know, all we have that kind of intimate day-to-day awareness of is our own inner mental life. I mean, there are so many things which we've become aware of where people differ. I mean, another example, synesthesia. You know, people who strongly associate auditory words with particular colours on a very reliable basis. It doesn't change over time.
No.
But if you're a synesthete, you just assume everybody else is like that as well.
Yes,
it's also when somebody says, what are you talking about? You know,
I'm really glad I'm not, by the way.
One of my daughters is. One of my
daughters really?
Yeah, one of the most common forms is this kind of colour word synesthesia. And
Did she find it an advantage or what?
It can be. It does seem to improve memory. It does seem to improve memory.
But you've got the association.
Yeah, you've got two different forms of coding. And there's I mean, taken to extremes, I mean, there's a very famous case by a Russian neuropsychologist called Luria. There's a wonderful little book. I mean, I read it as an undergraduate. It's a Penguin paperback, very, very slim volume called The Mind of a Mnemonist. And it's about a guy called Shereshevsky, who was studied by Luria. And Shereshevsky just had this incredible memory. I mean, just unbelievable. So you could show him a matrix of 10 by 10 digits, and he'd look at them. He could look at them for a couple of minutes, and they'd remember it perfectly. But if you tested him again in a year's time, he would remember it perfectly.
Wow.
He just, you know, the problem was that it was not useful. He couldn't keep down a proper job. But he had this very, very strong synesthesia, and that was probably a big part of the explanation for this amazing memory that he had. But he couldn't do anything that involved kind of abstract reasoning. He couldn't read a poem because the images that were summoned up in his head by reading the first 5 words were just too vivid and too concrete.
Got in the way.
And he couldn't keep a proper job. You know, it was a big disadvantage. There's a wonderful short story by the Argentinian writer Borges called Funes the Memorious, and it's just this very short story because that's all that Borges ever wrote, about a guy who has a kind of head injury that results in him not being able to forget anything. So that, you know, if he sees a horse galloping along, he'll remember the position of every hair on the horse's mane as it gallops, and he just ends up sitting in a dark room and just you know,
Too much stimulation.
Yeah, you just can't. It just can't cope. And there's a valid point there that we think of forgetting as being a bad thing, but it's not. We forget all the stuff we don't need to remember. We generally remember the important stuff.
Yeah.
Memory is a constructive process, and we often
That's
fill
right.
in the gaps without realizing we're doing it, and that's where the false memories can come in.
Yeah, it's when we revisit it that we're turning it more concrete. Yeah. So we're bordering on here all the time the nature of belief, aren't we? Because this is going on inside our heads. As you point out, we only know what happens inside our own. It's the theory of mind, isn't it? And so we're isolated in here. And so the conclusions that we come to, if we iterate them enough, they become firmer and firmer. And one
of the most pervasive cognitive biases, arguably the most pervasive, is something called confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And that basically refers to the fact that we all suffer from this, including skeptics, including atheists, and everybody. The evidence that seems to support either what we already believe or what we would like to be true doesn't have to be that strong. And we'll find ways of grabbing every little bit of evidence that supports our prior beliefs, and reasons for ignoring or downplaying or rejecting any evidence that seems to contradict them. And we do this in all spheres of life. It's not paranormal, it's religion, it's politics, it's certainly sport, watching your favorite football team.
Yes. So how much damage is caused to the society and the culture of the world because of that one aspect of human tendency?
I mean, as I say, I have huge respect for people who change their minds on issues when the evidence changes. But it's a very human thing to cling on to defend your beliefs. And again, there's a value in that. I mean, if you take it again in the wider context of the scientific process, I mean, skepticism is at the heart of the scientific process. I mean, one of the big influences on my own thinking was Sir Karl Popper, and his notion of falsifiability. Now, I don't think Popper was 100% right.
No.
But I mean, because basically, I think what he was describing was a kind of perfect, idealized version of what science should be, rather than what it actually is, because it's done by people, done by humans. I don't know a single scientist, or from undergraduate level upwards, who gets very, very excited when they run an experiment and the results don't come out supporting their hypothesis. So we're not into falsification in that sense. We run experiments hoping that we'll get this pattern of results, and when we do, great, that's my theory. But collectively, as a collective enterprise, science is the only approach which will ultimately reject ideas that don't work and not supported by evidence. It might take a long time, but it will happen.
Yes. We all want to boost our own baby, if we thought of it, don't we?
Yeah.
Hawkins was interesting in that sometime later in life, he contradicted his own PhD thesis.
Well, yeah. Again, people do that occasionally. I mean, one of Popper's great friends, Sir John Eccles, who was a brilliant neurophysiologist, actually ended up producing evidence that supported a view of how neurons work that he'd been strongly opposed to. But Popper was the one who convinced him. Actually, that's a good thing. You've done a good thing. Because
while we're on Popper, one aspect of his pronouncements that I can't agree with is he said that observations must fit into some context. They're not real unless they have a paradigm into which those weren't his words. So
right, I can't.
My apologies for the dead.
Did you say you did agree with that, or you didn't?
No, I don't agree with that. No.
So what's your disagreement on that one?
Well, I think you can make observations which currently mean nothing, and you don't know what they're they signify. We can't draw any conclusions because we have got no basis for coming to a conclusion.
Yeah. I'd have to know exactly what Popper meant by what he said.
Yeah.
You know, I can't remember. I can't remember that particular thing. I mean, I think, you know, we do perceive the world in terms of our prior beliefs and expectations. There's no doubt at all about that. I mean, this is going back to this idea of the way that we interact with the world around us is we have a mental model of it, and that mental model is based on incoming sensory information.
Yes.
That's sometimes called bottom-up processing, but that can be ambiguous or distorted. So we also make use of what's called top-down processing, our beliefs, our knowledge, our expectations about the world. And of course, if the incoming information is ambiguous or degraded, then top-down processing has a greater impact, and that's how we can end up seeing things and hearing things that aren't really there. You know, it's
so. But on this observation thing, I'm wondering when you know, Stone Age man looked up at the sky and saw stars, he had no concept of, no preconceived idea of what the hell they were, but they were an observation.
No. Again, I mean, I'm sure. Yeah. Again, without knowing exactly what Popper meant, I can't really comment. I mean, you know, what early man did was to see constellations up there, you know, that again weren't really there, but joining the dots and seeing meaning and reading meaning into it, you know, and identifying certain bodies with their gods and so on and so forth. So, but yeah, I mean, the more we understand, again, I would say this, wouldn't I? Because I'm a big fan of science, but I think the more we understand, it doesn't take any of that wonder away. It enhances it. You know, I mean, this is the point Richard Dawkins is always making, isn't it? Yeah.
It's always more fascinating to find out a bit how things really work and at a different level.
You don't lose the beauty; you just got the beauty plus an understanding of what's going on more at the molecular level and whatever else it may be.
Yes, indeed. So, if you wanted to advise somebody how to spot weird shit, would you have 2 or 3 or maybe 10 pointers to look out for?
Not sure. I mean, it's all around us. It's hard to avoid it. You know.
But what are the criteria? What are you looking for to identify?
I mean, I suppose the question would be, you know, how might you spot it in terms of kind of, if you like, almost defending yourself against it? Then it's about, so for me, it would be about asking questions about being aware of the different value of different forms of evidence, because you know, and that in itself is not an easy thing. For most people, including me, I've heard skeptics say, "Oh, I wouldn't believe in ghosts until I saw one." You know, and I'm thinking, no, even if you see one, you know, you should still not believe in it, because you're just as susceptible to hallucinations.
Well, that's right. Yes.
As anybody else.
You could have been drunk.
Exactly. You know, there's all kinds of possible explanations. So, you know, personal experience is overvalued as a form of evidence. Evidence from well-controlled scientific studies is, for me, the best evidence. But again, be aware of the weaknesses with the scientific method as used by human scientists. Always ask kind of, well, where's the evidence for this? I mean, so many people, and again, it's an understandable human thing, believe things just because someone said it, or they've seen a claim on the internet.
Well,
what's the evidence? What is the evidence?
They obviously haven't read the Royal Society's motto, then, have they?
Exactly. Yeah.
Nullius in verba.
Yeah. I mean, but people do, and again, it's an understandable human tendency from an evolutionary point of view. Most of what you know about the world, most of what I know about the world, most of what everybody knows about the world is not based on direct observation. It's based on what you've been told.
Yes.
And some sources you trust, and some you shouldn't. You know.
Yes. And in the case of things that you've been told, it might actually be several generations removed. You're hearing the last version of what he was told and what his grandfather told him.
But by and large, it makes sense. It makes sense for a small child to believe what they're told. If mummy says, don't touch that, it'll burn you, don't touch it. But then if mummy says that she believes in ghosts and, or for my money, also God and all these other things, then maybe you should be a little bit more kind of skeptical. But we wouldn't be. I mean, most of us would accept what our parents or teachers said until we reach an age where we begin to question those things.
Yeah, which is teenage. I've got teenagers. I've had teenagers. And yes, I used to teach teenagers. And that's when skepticism, criticism, challenge kicks in, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I need to kind of sometimes convince, I can't convince my own daughters that, this house isn't haunted. Where do you go,
Yeah.
I don't think they believe it really, but they do it to wind me up.
Yeah. Well, it's an entertaining thought, isn't it? And that's another problem, because a lot of people they don't understand, as you said, they don't understand what evidence is, what real scientific observational evidence is. And so they're happy to accept narrative.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, story is much more...
It's powerful.
I mean, you see that. I mean, particularly one of the most kind of obvious examples here is the kind of things like the scare over the MMR vaccine. On the one hand, you had mountains and mountains of dry epidemiological statistical evidence, which showed totally conclusively that the MMR vaccine was a good thing. Yeah. On the other hand, you had a photograph of a crying mother. And typically, because the way that journalism often works is you have this balance, but it's a false balance. It really is important that if you've got the experts on this side, I mean, climate change being another example, climate change deniers, who get equal airtime, or did up until quite recently. People who've been studying meteorology and climate science for decades, and it's so annoying. I remember I've been in situations myself where you've been doing a kind of debate on TV or something, and the presenter will say, so then we can see the controversy continues. And sometimes I've kind of come in and said, no, there is no controversy. We know that this vaccine is safe.
Yes. Yeah, they love it's a journalistic tool. They love controversy. They love emotion. And Dr. Wakefield, whatever, I can't remember his first name.
Andrew Wakefield. It was the press, it was the media that built him up. And now, of course, they vilify him and forget their own role in promoting what he was saying. But they were guilty. They were very guilty.
Yeah. But he wasn't innocent.
Oh God, no! He's no. He's a horrible, despicable man. Please don't give the impression that I'm letting him off the hook, because I definitely am not. No, he was unethical.
And he can't practice in this country. No, but he's doing well in America.
He'll do well in America because he'll be the darling of he is the darling of the conspiracy community. He'll fill lecture halls. He'll sell books. He'll do tours. And it really is awful when you get people like that. Cashing in. I mean, either he is either he's not a stupid man, so he knows what he's doing, and
he's making money.
Yeah,
he's making money. That's what he's doing. And the other one, I can't remember his name, but the other one was the journalist who exposed the Norfolk climate researchers because he got hold of their text when they were chatting informally about the value of this piece of data, and he presented it as though they were casting doubt on the whole.
Climate gate.
Yeah.
No, I mean, again, it's we're not going to put the world to rights in this 1 hour, John, but we can try.
But we can point to a few disgraceful people.
We can, and when we know they are disgraceful, yes, we should go in guns blazing.
Yeah.
Now, as I say, I'll be very sympathetic and friendly towards people on the other side of the debate when I feel that they are sincere and they genuinely believe what they're saying, and they think they're doing the right thing, even though sometimes they can be doing incredible damage.
Yeah.
Again, you still need to point that out.
Yeah.
But when people are doing it knowingly and
Yes.
simply, then that is unforgivable.
Yes. You're too kind.
I probably am. I mean, I'm sometimes told that, Then again, I have enough people on the other side of the debate who absolutely hate me. I get hate mail.
Well, that's a good sign.
I'm doing something.
Yes. So, are you going to do what Richard Dawkins does every Christmas? He reads out the emails that he's received that threaten him.
I did write one of the columns that I wrote for the Skeptic magazine. It was just a total reproduction of this mail that had been sent, which was unintentionally hilarious. Even there, if had this person ever, because I'd had lots of mail from this person, and they'd never put a name and address on the letters that they would send to me. But it was the one that really tickled me. The one that I reproduced as one of the columns was addressed to the headmaster at Goldsmiths. And kind of, do you know what this person in your school is doing? They're bringing you into disrepute, and if you know about it, then you're to blame as well. And it was, it was just, as I say, unintentionally very hilarious. But
yeah. Well,
and this is somebody who was basically kind of recommending that I should watch all these programs on like Most Haunted and so on to see that all of this is real.
Yes. No, it isn't. That's called acting.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Anyway, fun.
I get a lot of fun out of this because I do a couple of other shows apart from this FreeThought Hour one, which is Global Atheist News. And very often I'm reporting on some crazy preacher in America. There's one called Greg Loch, who you may have seen. And he thinks man didn't go to the moon. He believes in demons and witches. And he's strutting on the stage like the big I am. And it's quite humorous. And of course, the other show that I do is Views on the News, because the news itself is meant to be delivered dispassionately, but then we have the spin-off where we have a panel of opinionated people. I might invite you to become a panel member, and we talk about, we give our views on the news, and it's a lot of fun. And I have panelists from all over the world. Well, all over the world that's in a suitable time zone, because of course Australia is very inconveniently upside down in terms of the clock. Chris, you have been fantastic.
My pleasure.
And I'd like to announce, because you've told me that I can, that you've agreed to be a speaker at a future event that we will stage in the usually towards the middle of maybe May, June, that time of the year in London. And we look forward to that with great glee. Yeah, it'll be great. Okay, well, it's coming up to the last minute, in which I have just enough time to announce that next week our guest, and Tercia will be back with me, I believe, is Sanal Edamaruku, who is an Indian currently resident in Finland, and he's organized a cruise on the Baltic. What's it called? The Rationalist Cruise or something, and all sorts of wonderful people that have signed up to attend this and to do presentations on board this cruise liner. And it includes Michael Sherlock, A.C. Grayling, Mariam Namazi, Stephen Law, lots of other names too. I'm hoping to be able to go. That's at the end of April. So there you go. Once again, Chris, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
See you again soon, I hope.
Indeed.
Bye-bye.